I spent 7 years walking on eggshells in a toxic marriage with a master manipulator until I saw gaslighting, reclaimed my voice, and walked away. Every move you make, because you never know what might set off the next explosion. That was my life for 7 years. 7 years of walking on eggshells around my own wife in my own home. But this week, I finally did what I should have done years ago. I stepped on every single one of those eggshells and walked straight out the door. Let me paint you a picture of what living with a master manipulator looks like. It starts small, so small you barely notice it. A comment here, a suggestion there. She would say things like, "Are you really going to wear that shirt?" with just enough concern in her voice to make you second-guess yourself. Or, "I am just worried about you spending so much time with your friends. They do not seem to have your best interests at heart." The genius of it was how reasonable she always sounded. Never yelling, never screaming. Just this constant gentle pressure that made you feel like maybe she was right. Maybe that shirt did look terrible. Maybe your friends were a bad influence. Maybe you really were making all these poor decisions and she was just trying to help. I remember the first time I realized something was wrong. We'd been married about 2 years, and I wanted to go on a weekend fishing trip with my dad and brother, something we had done every summer since I was 12. She did not say no. She never said no directly. Instead, she got this hurt look in her eyes and said, "Of course, you should go. I just thought we were going to spend the weekend together, but I understand if fishing is more important." The way she said it made me feel like the worst husband in the world, so I canceled the trip. My dad was confused. My brother was disappointed. But I told myself I was being a good husband, putting my marriage first. What I did not realize was that I had just failed the first test. I had shown her exactly how to control me. From that point on, every decision became a negotiation, not an open discussion, but this subtle dance where she would express disappointment or concern, and I would find myself changing my mind to avoid that look, that tone, that atmosphere of tension that would hang over the house for days if I did not comply. She had this way of making everything my fault without ever directly saying it. If she was upset about something at work, somehow it became about how I had not been supportive enough. If she was stressed about money, it was because I was not ambitious enough in my career. If she was unhappy about our social life, it was because I was too introverted and did not make enough effort. The conversations always followed the same pattern. She would bring up an issue but frame it as concern for me or for us. "I am just worried that you are not reaching your potential," she would say. "I see so much more in you than you see in yourself." It sounds supportive, right? But what she was really saying was that I was failing and she was disappointed in me, and God forbid I ever got frustrated or tried to push back. The moment I raised my voice even slightly, she would get this wounded look and say something like, "I do not understand why you are getting so angry. I am just trying to help." Suddenly, I was the bad guy for having emotions. I was the one who needed to apologize. I was the one who was being unreasonable. So I learned to keep my voice calm, to swallow my frustration, to always be the one who said sorry first. I became an expert at reading her moods, at anticipating what might upset her, at avoiding any topic or situation that might cause conflict. I was living in a constant state of hypervigilance in my own home. The worst part was how isolated I became, not all at once, but gradually. She never forbade me from seeing friends or family, but she had ways of making it difficult. If I made plans, she would suddenly have a crisis that needed my attention, or she would be incredibly cold and distant when I got home, making it clear that my absence had caused her pain. Eventually, it was just easier to stay home than deal with the aftermath. Looking back now, I can see how calculated it all was, how she systematically dismantled my confidence, my relationships, my sense of self. But when you are in the middle of it, when it happens so slowly and subtly, you do not see it. You just know that you are constantly anxious, constantly second-guessing yourself, constantly feeling like you are failing as a husband. I would wake up every morning wondering what mood she would be in, what I might do wrong that day, how I could avoid setting her off. I would rehearse conversations in my head, trying to find the right words that would not trigger her disappointment or her tears. I lived in a state of constant tension, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. The crazy thing is, to everyone else, she was perfect, charming, intelligent, articulate. She had this way of making people feel special when she talked to them. Our friends and family adored her. If I ever tried to hint at problems in our marriage, people would look at me like I was crazy. "You are so lucky," they would say. "She is amazing." And I would nod and smile and agree, because what else could I do? But behind closed doors, I was disappearing piece by piece, year by year. I stopped having opinions about where we went to dinner. I stopped suggesting movies or activities. I stopped talking about my day at work because somehow it always led to criticism or suggestions for how I could be doing better. I became a ghost in my own life, going through the motions, but not really living. The private manipulation was bad enough, but things really got ugly when she started doing it in public. That is when I began to understand that this was not just about control at home. This was about complete dominance, about making sure everyone knew who was really in charge. It started at dinner parties. We would be sitting with friends, having what seemed like a normal conversation, and she would slip in these little comments that would cut me down in front of everyone. "Oh, he has always been terrible with directions." She would laugh after I would tell a story about getting lost. "I have to do all the navigation or we would never get anywhere." Everyone would chuckle and I would force a smile, but inside I would feel that familiar knot in my stomach. Or she would bring up embarrassing stories from our past, always framed as loving teasing, but with just enough edge to make me squirm. "You should have seen him when we first moved in together," she would tell our friends. "He did not even know how to do laundry properly. I had to teach him everything." The implication was clear. Without her, I was helpless. The worst part was how she would contradict me in front of people. I would be telling a story or sharing an opinion and she would jump in with, "Actually, that is not quite right." Or, "I think what he meant to say was." She would correct details that did not matter, challenge statements that were perfectly reasonable. All with this sweet, helpful tone that made it look like she was just being supportive. But I knew what she was really doing. She was establishing herself as the authority, the one who had the real information, the better judgment. She was systematically undermining my credibility with our social circle, making me look incompetent and unreliable. And she was doing it so skillfully that most people did not even notice. The gaslighting got worse too. She would bring up conversations we had supposedly had, agreements we had supposedly made, things I had supposedly said or done. When I would protest that I did not remember it that way, she would get this patient, concerned look and say something like, "Honey, we talked about this just last week. Do not you remember?" Sometimes she would do it in front of other people, making me look like I was losing my mind. "We discussed this at dinner on Tuesday," she would say to our friends with just the right amount of worry in her voice. I am getting concerned about his memory, and suddenly everyone is looking at me like maybe I really am having some kind of mental breakdown. The family gatherings were the absolute worst. My parents had always been supportive, but she knew exactly how to work them. She would arrive with homemade cookies, compliment my mother's cooking, ask thoughtful questions about my father's work. Within 1 hour she would have them completely charmed. Then she would start dropping these subtle hints about how hard she was working to help me improve myself. "I keep encouraging him to take that promotion," she would tell my mother loud enough for me to hear. "But you know how he is with change." Or she would mention how she was trying to get him to be more social because she was worried about him isolating himself. The message was always the same. She was the devoted wife working tirelessly to help her problematic husband become a better person. And my family ate it up. They started giving me advice about listening to my wife more, about appreciating what I had, about how lucky I was to have someone who cared so much about my personal growth. I began to dread social situations entirely. Every invitation became a source of anxiety because I knew it would be another opportunity for her to chip away at my reputation, my relationships, my sense of self. I would spend the entire evening on edge waiting for the next subtle attack, the next public humiliation disguised as loving concern. She had this way of making me feel like I was overreacting if I ever tried to address it. "I was just joking," she would say if I brought up one of her public comments. "Everyone knows I love you. You are being too sensitive." Or she would turn it around and make it about her feelings. "I cannot believe you think I would try to hurt you. That really hurts my feelings." The isolation became more complete. Friends stopped inviting us to things because they could sense the tension, even if they could not put their finger on what was wrong. My relationship with my family became strained because they kept taking her side, kept telling me how wonderful she was and how I needed to appreciate her more. I found myself making excuses to avoid gatherings, which only gave her more ammunition. "See, this is exactly what I was talking about," she would tell people. "He has become so antisocial. I am really worried about him." And the cycle would continue. The crazy thing was how she could switch it on and off in public. She was the perfect wife, attentive, supportive, loving. She would hold my hand, laugh at my jokes, gaze at me adoringly. But the moment we were alone in the car afterward, the mask would come off. "You embarrassed me tonight," she would say, her voice flat and cold. "The way you interrupted me when I was talking to Sarah was incredibly rude." Or she would pick apart everything I had said, every interaction I had had, finding fault with my behavior, my choices, my very existence. I started recording some of our conversations. Not to use against her, but just to make sure I was not going crazy. Because by this point, I was genuinely questioning my own memory, my own perceptions. When someone tells you you are wrong about everything constantly for years, you start to believe it. But listening to those recordings later, I could hear it clearly. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the way she would twist my words and change the subject whenever I tried to stand up for myself. It was all there, documented proof that I was not losing my mind. That is when I started to understand that this was not going to get better. This was not a phase or a rough patch in our marriage. This was who she was, and this was who I had become under her influence. I was a shell of the person I used to be, constantly walking on eggshells, constantly afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. The breaking point came at my sister's birthday party. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. She had been in one of her moods all week, finding fault with everything I did. The way I loaded the dishwasher was wrong. The route I took to work was inefficient. Even the way I breathed while watching TV seemed to irritate her. We arrived at my sister's house and immediately she switched into performance mode. Bright smile, warm hugs, compliments about the decorations. She brought an expensive bottle of wine and made sure everyone noticed how thoughtful she was. I remembered this was your favorite, she told my sister, loud enough for the whole room to hear. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. She was charming, engaged, asking all the right questions. I actually started to relax, thinking maybe we would get through the evening without incident. That was my first mistake. The trouble started when my cousin brought up a story about a vacation he had taken with his wife. They had gotten lost hiking and had to spend an extra night camping under the stars. He was laughing about how it turned into one of their favorite memories, how sometimes the best experiences come from things going wrong. That sounds amazing, I said, genuinely meaning it. Sometimes those unplanned adventures are the best ones. That is when she struck. Oh, please, she said with a laugh that had an edge to it. You could not handle an unplanned adventure if your life depended on it. Remember when we got caught in that rainstorm last summer? You practically had a panic attack because we did not have an umbrella. The room got quiet. My cousin looked uncomfortable. My sister raised an eyebrow. I felt that familiar heat rising in my cheeks, that sick feeling in my stomach that came whenever she humiliated me in front of people. But this time was different. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe I just reached my limit, but I found myself speaking up. That is not what happened, I said, keeping my voice calm. I was concerned about you getting soaked in that dress you loved. I offered to go get the car so you would not have to walk in the rain. Her eyes flashed with something dangerous. In that moment, I knew I had crossed the line by contradicting her in public, but instead of backing down like I usually did, I held her gaze. Well, she said, her voice getting that syrupy sweet tone that meant she was about to go nuclear. I suppose we remember it differently. You have always been a little dramatic about these things. She turned to my family with a concerned expression. I've been worried about his stress levels lately. He has been so anxious about everything. I keep telling him he should maybe talk to someone about it. And there it was. In front of my entire family, she had just implied that I was mentally unstable, that my version of events could not be trusted because I was having some kind of breakdown. It was masterful, really. She had managed to discredit me and position herself as the caring, worried wife all in one move. But something had shifted. Maybe it was seeing the way my sister was looking at her with this expression I had never seen before, like she was really seeing her for the first time, or maybe it was my father's face, the way his jaw tightened when she mentioned me needing to talk to someone. My brother-in-law cleared his throat. I remember that rainstorm, he said quietly. You guys were leaving our place. I saw him offer to get the car. Seemed pretty considerate to me. The silence that followed was deafening. She had been caught in a lie, called out in front of everyone. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely. I saw pure rage flash across her face before she quickly rearranged it into hurt confusion. Well, maybe I misremembered, she said, but her voice had lost that confident edge. I have been so stressed with work lately, but the damage was done not to me for once, but to her. Everyone in that room had just witnessed her try to gaslight me, had seen her get caught in a blatant lie. The spell she had cast over my family was starting to crack. The rest of the evening was awkward. She tried to recover, but something had changed in the room's dynamic. People were not laughing at her jokes as readily. When she made another subtle dig at me later, my mother actually frowned. My sister kept looking between us with this thoughtful expression. On the drive home, the real fireworks started. The moment we got in the car, she exploded. How dare you contradict me in front of your family, she hissed. You made me look like a liar. You were lying, I said simply. You know exactly what happened that night. That is not the point, she screamed. You were supposed to support me, not throw me under the bus in front of people. What kind of husband does that? For years, that question would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and self-doubt. I would have apologized, would have convinced myself that maybe I really was the problem. But not this time. The kind of husband who is tired of being humiliated, I said quietly. The kind who is tired of walking on eggshells around his own wife. She went completely silent for about 30 seconds. The only sound in the car was the hum of the engine. Then she started crying. Not the angry tears from before, but these soft, wounded sobs that she knew always broke my resolve. I cannot believe you think I humiliate you, she whispered. I love you. Everything I do is because I love you and want us to be happy. If you cannot see that, then maybe we have bigger problems than I thought. And there it was, the threat, the implication that if I did not fall back in line, if I did not apologize, and return to my role as the compliant husband, then our marriage was in jeopardy. It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple. But for the first time in 7 years, the threat did not scare me. It actually felt like relief, because I was finally starting to see the pattern clearly. The manipulation, the control, the systematic destruction of my self-worth. I was starting to understand that this was not love, this was not a marriage, this was a hostage situation. When we got home, she went straight to the bedroom and slammed the door. I sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about what had happened, about my brother-in-law defending me, about the look on my sister's face, about how it felt to finally stand up for myself, even in that small way. I realized that the person I used to be, the person I was before I met her, was still in there somewhere, buried under years of manipulation and control, but still alive. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find him again. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in years. She was still giving me the silent treatment, which was actually a blessing in disguise. It gave me space to think, to really examine what my life had become, and I decided to run an experiment. For the next week, I stopped walking on eggshells, not in a dramatic, confrontational way, but quietly, methodically. I stopped anticipating her moods. I stopped censoring myself. I stopped automatically deferring to her opinions. I wanted to see what would happen if I just acted like a normal person in my own house. The first test came that very morning. She finally emerged from the bedroom around 10 o'clock, clearly expecting me to grovel and apologize for the night before. Instead, I was sitting at the kitchen table reading the news on my phone, drinking coffee. Good morning, I said casually, not looking up. She stood there for a moment, probably waiting for me to launch into an apology. When I did not, she huffed and started making a big show of preparing her breakfast, slamming cabinet doors and sighing dramatically. Normally, I would have asked what was wrong, would have tried to smooth things over. Instead, I finished my coffee, put my mug in the dishwasher, and said, I am going to run some errands. See you later. The look of shock on her face was almost comical. I was deviating from the script, not playing my assigned role in her drama. She clearly did not know how to respond. Where are you going? She demanded. Hardware store, grocery store, maybe stop by the bookstore, I said, grabbing my keys. Just normal weekend stuff. We need to talk about last night, she said, her voice taking on that edge that usually made me freeze. We can talk when I get back, I said simply, if you want to, and I left just like that. No big speech, no dramatic exit. I just walked out while she was still formulating her response. The errands felt liberating. I bought the books I wanted to read, not the ones she thought I should read. I picked up groceries based on what I actually liked to eat, not what she deemed healthy or appropriate. For 3 hours I was just a guy running errands, not a husband waiting for the next criticism. When I got home, she was waiting in the living room with red-rimmed eyes and a box of tissues. The performance was beginning. We need to talk about what is happening to us, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I feel like you are pulling away from me, and I do not understand why. I sat down across from her, not next to her like I usually would. I am not pulling away, I said calmly. I am just not walking on eggshells anymore. What is that supposed to mean? She asked, but I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly what it meant. It means I am tired of monitoring every word I say, every expression on my face, every decision I make because I am afraid of how you will react, I said. It means I am done apologizing for things that are not actually problems. She launched into the usual routine, how much she loved me, how everything she did was for our relationship, how hurt she was that I would think she was controlling. But this time, instead of getting drawn into the emotional whirlpool, I just listened. When she finished, I said, I believe that you think you love me, but the way you show it does not feel like love to me. It feels like management." That stopped her cold. She was not used to me being this direct, this clear in my communication. She tried a different approach. "I think you are having some kind of midlife crisis," she said, switching to concern mode. "Maybe you should talk to someone. This behavior is not like you." "You are right," I said. "It is not like the person I have become over the past 7 years, but it is like the person I used to be before I learned to be afraid of disappointing you." Over the next few days, I continued the experiment. When she criticized my choice of restaurant for dinner, I did not change it. When she made a snide comment about my clothes, I wore them anyway. When she tried to guilt me out of plans with friends, I went anyway. The results were fascinating and terrifying. Her behavior escalated dramatically. The subtle manipulation gave way to more obvious tactics. She would have crying fits when I did not immediately cave to her wishes. She would give me the silent treatment for days, then explode in rage when it did not bring me running back to apologize. She started making threats. If I went out with friends, she would be rethinking our relationship when I got home. If I disagreed with her in front of others, she would punish me with days of cold hostility. She began weaponizing everything she could think of, my relationships with family, our financial situation, even our future plans. But the more extreme her behavior became, the clearer the pattern was. I started seeing things that had been invisible before. How she would isolate me from friends by creating drama every time I made plans. How she would undermine my confidence at work by constantly questioning my decisions and abilities. How she would rewrite history to make me doubt my own memory and perception. I also started noticing how she talked about other people. Her sister was too needy. Her best friend was going through a difficult phase. Her co-workers were incompetent or jealous of her success. Anyone who did not serve her needs was somehow deficient. The breakthrough came when she tried to involve my family in her campaign to bring me back in line. She called my sister crying about how worried she was about my recent behavior changes. She told my mother that she thought I might be having an affair because I was being so secretive and distant. But my family had witnessed the scene at the birthday party. They had seen her true colors, and they were not buying it. My sister actually called me to ask if I was okay, if there was anything going on at home that I needed to talk about. For the first time in years, I told someone the truth, not the sanitized version I'd been telling myself, but the real truth about what my marriage had become, about the constant criticism, the public humiliation, the way I had learned to live in a state of hypervigilance in my own home. My sister listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything or offer advice. And when I was done, she said something that hit me like a lightning bolt. "You know that is not normal, right? The way she treats you, that is not how people who love each other behave." It seems obvious now, but after years of being told that I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too difficult, I had lost sight of what normal looked like. I had accepted that constant tension and anxiety were just the price of marriage, that walking on eggshells was what love required. But it was not. Love did not require me to disappear. Love did not demand that I sacrifice my personality, my friendships, my sense of self on the altar of someone else's need for control. Real love would want me to be myself, would celebrate my quirks instead of trying to sand them down. That night I made a decision. I was not going to keep playing this game. I was not going to keep pretending that this was a marriage worth saving. I was not going to keep walking on eggshells, hoping that if I just got better at the dance, the music would finally change. The confrontation I had been building toward finally happened on a Thursday evening. She had spent the entire day texting me passive-aggressive messages about how distant I had become, how she barely recognized the man she married. When I got home, she was waiting in the living room with what I now recognized as her strategic positioning for maximum dramatic effect. "We need to have a serious conversation," she announced, using that tone that usually made my stomach drop. "This cannot continue." "You are absolutely right," I said, sitting down across from her. "It cannot." She launched into her prepared speech about how concerned she was about my behavior, how I was destroying our marriage with my selfishness and emotional unavailability. But this time, I did not defend myself. I did not explain or justify or apologize. I just listened. When she finished, I said calmly, "Are you done?" The question clearly threw her off. She was expecting the usual dance of guilt and reconciliation. Instead, I pulled out my phone and played one of the recordings I had made weeks earlier. Her voice filled the room, sharp and cutting, berating me for leaving dishes in the sink, telling me I was pathetic and useless around the house. On the recording, I could hear myself apologizing repeatedly, trying to explain while she just kept attacking. Her face went white. "You recorded me?" How dare you violate my privacy like that? Privacy? I laughed, and it felt good to laugh at the absurdity. You said all of this to me in our kitchen. This is how you talk to your husband when you think no one is listening. She tried to recover, switching to victim mode. I was having a bad day. You are taking things out of context. This is not fair. You want to hear more? I asked, reaching for my phone again. I have got hours of this stuff. You calling me names, telling me I am worthless, threatening to leave every time I do not immediately cave to what you want. The mask was slipping fast now. I could see panic in her eyes as she realized her usual tactics were not working. That is when she played her final card. If you are so miserable, then maybe we should just get divorced, she said, tears streaming down her face. Is that what you want? To throw away 7 years of marriage? In the past, that threat would have sent me into a panic. I would have immediately started backtracking, apologizing, begging her not to leave. But this time I felt nothing but relief. Yes, I said simply. That is exactly what I want. The word hung in the air between us. She stared at me in complete shock, clearly not expecting that response. The tears stopped instantly. You do not mean that, she said, her voice now cold and calculating. You are just angry. We can work through this. No, we cannot, I said, standing up. Because you do not think there is anything to work through. You think the problem is me not accepting your treatment. But I finally understand that the problem is the treatment itself. She tried everything then. Anger, tears, threats, promises to change. Accusations that I was having an affair, claims that I was mentally unstable. She cycled through every manipulation technique in her arsenal. But I was done explaining, done defending, done trying to make her understand. I had spent 7 years walking on eggshells, and now I was finally ready to step on every single one of them. I will be staying at my sister's tonight, I said, heading toward the bedroom to pack a bag. We can figure out the details later. You cannot just leave, she screamed, following me. You cannot just walk away from our marriage. I turned around and looked at her one last time, really looked at her, and for the first time in years I saw her clearly. Not as the woman I had fallen in love with, not as the wife I had been trying so hard to please, but as the person she actually was. Someone who needed to control and diminish others to feel powerful. Someone who could not love without owning. Watch me, I said, and walked out the door. Walking out that door was the hardest and easiest thing I had ever done. Hard because I was ending 7 years of my life. Easy because I was finally free. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. She tried everything to get me back. Love bombing, where she suddenly became the perfect wife she had never been. Threats about taking everything in the divorce. Attempts to turn my family against me by playing the abandoned, heartbroken wife. But my family had seen enough. My sister let me stay in her guest room, and never once suggested I should work things out. My parents, who had been charmed by her for years, finally admitted they had always felt uncomfortable around her, but could not put their finger on why. The divorce process revealed even more about who she really was. She tried to claim I was mentally unstable, using my recent erratic behavior as evidence. She attempted to get alimony by portraying herself as financially dependent, conveniently forgetting she made more money than I did. When those tactics failed, she tried one last manipulation. She showed up at my sister's house, sobbing, begging me to give her another chance. She promised she would change, that she would go to therapy, that she finally understood what she had done wrong. For a moment, just a moment, I almost wavered. 7 years of conditioning does not disappear overnight. But then I remembered something my therapist had told me. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. She had shown me who she was for 7 years. The tears, the promises, the sudden self-awareness. This was just another performance. Another attempt to regain control. I am sorry, I told her, and I meant it. But I am done. The relief on my family's faces when I said those words told me everything I needed to know. They had been watching me disappear for years, hoping I would find my way back to myself. And finally, I had. 6 months later, the divorce was final. I found a place of my own. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. No one criticized my choice of furniture or told me I was loading the dishwasher wrong. No one made me feel like I was walking through a minefield every time I opened my mouth. I started rebuilding the relationships I had lost, called friends I had not spoken to in years, made plans without having to negotiate or justify them to anyone, rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned because they took too much time away from the marriage. The most amazing thing was rediscovering my own voice. For so long I had been speaking in the careful, measured tones of someone afraid of saying the wrong thing. Now I could express opinions, disagree with people, even argue when I felt strongly about something. I could be myself without apology. I will not lie and say it was easy. There were moments of doubt, times when I wondered if I had made a mistake. Divorce is hard, even when it is the right choice. But every time I started to second-guess myself, I would remember what it felt like to live in constant anxiety, to monitor every word and expression, to feel like a stranger in my own life. Recently, I heard through mutual friends that she is dating someone new. I actually felt sorry for the guy. He probably thinks he has met this amazing, charming woman who is just recovering from a difficult marriage to an unstable man. He has no idea what he is in for, but that is not my problem anymore. I learned something important through all of this. You cannot love someone into being a better person. You cannot sacrifice enough of yourself to fix someone else's brokenness. All you can do is decide what you will and will not accept in your own life. I spent 7 years walking on eggshells, tiptoeing around someone else's inability to handle normal human interaction. I bent myself into shapes I did not recognize, trying to be the perfect husband for someone who could not be satisfied, but this week I finally stepped on those eggshells and walked away. And you know what I found on the other side? Peace, self-respect, the ability to sleep through the night without wondering what I had done wrong or what crisis would be waiting for me in the morning. I found myself again, and that person, he is never going back to walking on eggshells for anyone. Our story has come to an end. If you have made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I have selected 2 other videos for you that I am sure you will enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I will be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.